Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now today we're looking at the RTX 5070, or the wrong graphics card, as I'm sure you're all about to tell me. It's not been a smooth launch for Nvidia's 50 series, missing render output units, lack of stock, exorbitant pricing on stock that is available, and according to some reviews not enough of a performance uplift over certain previous gen cards. First of all, I'd like to thank Palette for sending this one over for review. Secondly, I'd like to apologise to Palette for what I'm about to say. Seriously, I like the card itself. Triple fan design, a touch of RGB which can be adjusted or turned off through the Thundermaster app, as well as the ability to personalise the card using the Maker program. Being able to download, customise and print 3D covers is a nice feature. It can really make a card feel like your own, especially if you're going for a themed PC build. Now, I decided to wait a couple of days before posting this so that I could get a better idea of pricing and availability here in the UK. Unfortunately, things aren't too good here right now. Oh, and neither is pricing and availability of the 5070. I have seen this model in stock at just under £700, and most 5070s are occupying the 650 to 750 bracket. It's too much for a 12GB mid-range GPU. I've had it in my system for a little while now, and I want to share my honest experience with it. I tested all of today's games at 1440p, and at this resolution it seems to offer performance that's a bit better than the 4070 Super. I won't run through a full suite of comparative gameplay tests, but here is the relative performance displayed in FPS and percentage format based on the average frame rate across 9 games, 6 with ray tracing disabled and 3 with ray tracing enabled. In my tests, the 5070 Gaming Pro OC was 4.85% faster than the 4070 Super without RT, and 3.45% faster with RT. The 4070 Super I used was a reference Nvidia model. But let's play some games. First of all, we have Baldur's Gate 3 at 1440p, as are all of the games today. I stuck with 1440p throughout. We have the Ultra preset here with DLAA. A lot of you were saying turn off TAA, so I've done that across all of today's games. Not sure why I didn't do it sooner, to be honest. Now, in pairing with the 5070, I have an i9-14900K capped to 125 watts for the sake of my cheap air cooler, but we can still make the most out of this GPU in pairing with this CPU with a thermal limit. So first of all, Baldur's Gate 3, 147 FPS on average with a 1% low of 91 and a 0.1% low of 54. For Counter-Strike 2, a game that's more GPU intensive than its predecessor, we saw 402 frames per second at the very high preset with anti-aliasing switched off because this will default to MSAA, and I don't really think it's necessary here for an online competitive title. The 1% low was 209 and the 0.1% number was 137. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 with the Ultra preset and native AA, so SMAA2TX selected, saw 95 frames per second, a 1% low of 82 and a 0.1% low of 76. So a nice consistent gameplay experience here, and the game looks absolutely fantastic with these visual options. I thought for sure that Spider-Man 2 would certainly be encroaching on our 12GB VRAM buffer, but we're utilising just under 8 gigs here with a very high preset and DLAA. We saw 88 FPS with a 1% low of 42 and a 0.1% low of 22. I seem to experience a few dips and drops here and there no matter the hardware I use for this one. It just doesn't run all that great on PC in my opinion. Now, in terms of noise and temperature, the card stays pretty cool. With these stock settings, you're going to see less than 60 degrees a lot of the time. We can certainly hear it when it's in a PC case, but nothing out of the ordinary. I find myself playing a lot of Red Dead Redemption 1 at the moment. This is actually capped to 144 FPS, and it didn't miss a beat here with the high settings and DLAA with the 5070. There weren't really any dips or drops to speak of, although that being said, you will pick up a few changes with the 1 and 0.1% lows, but at 140 and 129 respectively, well, this represents a very smooth and consistent experience here. And this still holds up really well. It looks great even in 2025. Starfield with the high preset and 100% resolution scale runs with over 60 frames per second, which is always a good sign. You can never be too sure with this one. 78 FPS overall, a 1% low of 60 and a 0.1% low of 34. I found myself coming back to Starfield recently. I know it isn't the most popular Bethesda game out there, but I certainly have fun playing it, and every time I fire it up, I think, oh, I'll just benchmark it for a few moments and then end up spending hours playing it. Probably part of the reason why this video was delayed. Next up we have Cyberpunk 2077 with the high preset. I also switched the crowds to high because it will default to medium when you select the high preset. I also chose DLAA with the transformer model. This one actually uses DLSS 4. You can choose between the latest transformer model, of course, or the older version of DLSS, the CNN model, but DLSS 4 looks a lot better, and especially with DLAA enabled, so at native resolution, it looks really good. And for an average of 103 FPS, it performs nicely as well. The 1% low was 72 and the 0.1% low was 61. We have two Red Dead Redemptions in one gameplay test today. This is, of course, Red Dead Redemption 2, running here with the ultra textures and everything else set to high. Of course, at 1440p with TAA, also at high here. Sharpness was turned about halfway up though, so it certainly looks a lot better. 122 FPS overall with a 1% low of 95 and a 0.1% low of 78, so it holds up pretty well even in and around busier areas such as Valentine here and Saint Denis. Next up we have Indiana Jones with the Ultra preset and DLAA. Now this is one of those games where you might find yourself nervously glancing at the VRAM utilization, especially if, like me, you have a performance overlay enabled. As you can see here, a pretty demanding title as far as our video memory is concerned. Nonetheless, we saw 106 FPS, a 1% low of 86 and a 0.1% low of 22. Now the stutters here weren't because of the VRAM at all. It's actually as we move between different areas, you're going to get a little loading icon pop up in the top right corner, and that always impacts the percentile lows. There's a sort of little micro stutter as you move between areas here, but for the most part it ran pretty well, and as you can see, our card is so close to 3 GHz. We're clocking at just over 2900, this Palette Gaming OC model, so a nice high clock speed on this thing. We're going to be doing something about that a little later on as well, seeing if we can boost it to just over 3 GHz. Before we look at some ray tracing and DLSS benchmarks, then we'll finalise with Call of Duty Black Ops 6 with the Ultra preset, 110 frames per second, a 1% low of 89 and a 0.1% low of 85. The footage you're seeing is from a bot match, but these figures were taken from 3 online free-for-all games. Now you might want to turn things down a little bit, especially if you have a higher refresh rate monitor, or enable some form of upscaling, but for me this was fine. Let's add some ray tracing and, where necessary, DLSS into the mix then, starting with The Witcher 3 Next Gen, 1440p with the RT Ultra preset and DLSS quality for 81 FPS, a 1% low of 63 and a 0.1% low of 55. Of course, we also have the option to swap out DLSS 4 in the Nvidia app. I've not done so for this one, but we may make another video doing just that very soon. Cyberpunk 2077 looks absolutely fantastic with the RT Ultra preset and DLSS quality with the transformer model selected. So by default we have DLSS 4 enabled here, no need to make any changes, this is built into the game. And we're seeing 78 frames per second on the 5070 with 1% low of 56 and a 0.1% low of 50. So it looks good and it performs pretty well also. Take a look at that VRAM usage. It's a good job this isn't an 8GB card, because we've blasted past that in many a games tested today, but we're not really encroaching on that 12GB maximum just yet for the ray tracing tests. Grand Theft Auto 5 Enhanced up next. Now this is probably quite a controversial one. It's receiving mixed reviews. Personally, I really like the changes that have been made to the lighting. I think performance leaves a little to be desired on certain hardware. I've experienced a few stutters here and there, but when you turn all the ray tracing options up, it can look really nice in some places. On the 5070, I was surprised that we didn't see a higher result, so I guess it's also quite demanding with the maximum options here. I did max out everything as well as the RT. I also selected DLAA for 103 frames per second, a 1% low of 68 and a 0.1% low of 55. Back to Indiana Jones now, this time with the high preset and the high RT or ray tracing preset with DLSS quality. We need DLSS enabled here because if we turn it off, the game does, well, it doesn't do too well. We're dropping below 60 immediately, stutters all over the place, probably a VRAM thing here. As you can see, we're pretty much maxing out the card memory wise for this one. That said, the performance figures were okay, 88 and 71 for the average and 1% lows. Again, moving between different areas does incur a little dip, as you can probably pick up on screen occasionally, so our 0.1% figure was 20. It performed okay though, and the card is still maintaining pretty decent temperatures, despite being pushed quite hard in this one. With the Gaming Pro OC card sitting so close to 3 GHz, I just had to give it a little bump. Now we can use the Thundermaster app for this. The built-in OC scanner will find the overclocking sweet spot according to the Palette website, but I prefer to just slowly increase the core clock in Afterburner. I'm a complete novice when it comes to overclocking, so I just went up in increments of 50 MHz until I hit plus 300, which was completely stable. Now any higher and some of my games froze or crashed, and I didn't even touch the memory clock because, like I say, this isn't something I usually do with new cards, any card really. The GPU was now boosting to over 3 GHz in games, something I'm not sure I've seen before, and this actually made more of a difference than I was expecting. I benchmarked Cyberpunk, Black Ops and Red Dead 2, and all showed noticeable gains across the average and percentile figures. Cyberpunk went from 109 on average to 114 with improved percentile lows. Black Ops 6 at Ultra with the increased core clock went from 86 in the in-game benchmark to 90, again with slightly improved percentile lows. And for Red Dead Redemption 2 with Ultra/High in the in-game benchmark, we went from 135 to 142 with bumps to that 1 and 0.1% low number as well. So yeah, the Gaming Pro OC edition still has a little more OC headroom, and even with an increase of 300 MHz, we can pick up on some noticeable changes. Not necessarily changes you're going to feel when actually playing, but if you've got a performance overlay enabled like I do, you may see those differences in certain areas. Overall, the RTX 5070 is fine in a vacuum, but stock is poor, pricing is too high, and while the 12GB of VRAM wasn't an issue for me today, it seems a little lackluster considering the asking price. Indiana Jones, for example, gobbled up almost every last megabyte with ray tracing and DLSS, and you have to wonder how long before you're nervously glancing at a VRAM usage overlay across a wider range of titles. We should also mention the AMD 9070 and XT as they're now on the shelves, literally, which is surprising. The 9070 was in stock here on launch day. The cheapest I saw was £525, which is right on the money as far as UK pricing is concerned. Even as I'm looking now, actually at the time of recording this audio, the Sapphire Pulse version is available at £540. I don't have a sample yet, your boy was not hooked up, but from a handful of reviews I've looked at, this will trade blows with Nvidia's new offering. I can't form my own conclusion though until I've tested one. We also have to think about the 9070 XT, which was also in stock at under £600 on launch day, and while there is still some availability across different sites, prices seem to have crept up to between $630 and $750 for a lot of models. It'll depend on where you live, of course, but right now it seems it's not as straightforward as saying, oh, just go AMD instead. At least not yet. It's worth keeping a close eye though on pricing and stock levels. With this Palette 5070 Gaming Pro OC, I find myself conflicted. I like the card, I've always had good experiences with Palette GPUs, well, so far so good anyway, but the GPU underneath it all, the 5070 itself, doesn't stand out right now, to say the least. Not with the prices the way they are. Even if prices were normal across the market, I'd be inclined to try and save a bit of cash by going for a 4070 Super, and even then, the little voice in my head would go from whispering, what about the 9070 XT, to screaming, what about the 9070 XT? Again, I've not tested one yet, but I have mostly working eyeballs, and I've seen plenty of reviews that paint a pretty positive picture. Now, if only prices were just normalised so that making an informed decision didn't have to be based on price and stock levels that seem to change on a near daily basis. Well, I don't think I've done such an in-depth review of something in ages. I usually just play 20 games or so and let you decide for yourselves. But there we are. Thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts down below if you enjoyed it. Leave a like. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section, of course. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and you want to, of course. We don't often do more expensive cards on this channel, but considering we haven't actually seen anything decent at the lower end from Nvidia or AMD for a while now, well, I thought we'd mix things up a bit. But thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.